I've come today to talk to you about grief. And I'm going to talk today in a way that perhaps is different. My intention in this dialogue is different than perhaps what you might be used to from a typical video you might watch. I don't want to talk to you from this place of I am the teacher and you are the student. I don't want to talk to you from this place of somehow I know and you don't know, and I'm going to impart some great knowledge on you. I think in that role, we are separate from each other in some way. I prefer to think about the way this is going to unfold as more along the lines of there are some things that have moved to the foreground of my awareness that I would like to share with you that I think are profound and meaningful and important, and speak to the very important topic of grief and loss and sorrow. And I would like to bring these to the foreground of your awareness as well. I think that all I could ever do is help you remember things you already know that I think are important to remember. You see, if I share something and you find yourself nodding your head in agreement, how did you know to agree with me? The only way you could know to agree with me is you must have already known. So my hope is that the words I speak today are words that connect us, that bring us together, that bring us closer to each other as we talk about a topic that is shared by all of us, as we talk about our grief. So let me say a little bit about grief. Grief is, of course, inevitable. Everything that we love, we will one day lose. And that's why poets say things like, it's very brave to love that which death can touch. Our bodies are beautiful but dangerous. Our bodies are at risk from airborne pathogens. They are at risk from cancers, from heart attacks. Our bodies will wrinkle as they age, and one day they will die and we will leave our bodies. Nature is as beautiful as it is dangerous. It comes with violent thunderstorms and terrible earthquakes. And it comes with the strange reality that life must eat life to survive. And then there are the griefs that are simply a part of being a human alive on this earth. Then there are the griefs that come from being a human alive at this time on the earth. That we as a culture have created a shared sorrow or many shared losses that come from the way in which we have come to live together. And we as people are born into this culture and then must suffer these collective losses. Now, let me explain to you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and just read to you a list of some of these losses. But before I do, and I forgot to do this at the beginning, let's just take a moment. I take a few deep breaths and just come back into this space. What I'd invite you to do, if you're in a place where you can, is close your eyes. If you're not in a space where you can close your eyes, of course, don't. And then what I'd encourage you to do is start with a few deep breaths. And then just listen. I'm going to play a little bit of background music and just listen to the words that I have to share here with you. In this moment in time, there is nowhere for you to go. You are just where you need to be. In this moment in time, there is nothing you have to do. In this moment in time, there is no one you have to be. Just come and be here now with me, with nowhere to go, with nothing to do, with no one to be. Just come into the fullness of this moment. As best you can, focus on your breath and quiet your mind. And as you do, open your heart. Just feel that sense of connection, of belonging, of place that is your birthright in this world. Just come join me here in this very moment. And from this space, let me go ahead and read to you a little bit about some of our shared sorrows. This is the world we live in today. 1 in 9 people in the world will go hungry every day. Current estimates show about 900 million people in 93 countries do not have enough food to eat. And the problem isn't that we aren't producing enough food. The problem is that we do not have ways of sharing it with each other. Similarly with water, there's enough fresh water for every person currently living on this planet. And yet we have not built systems to share it well. And so 2 billion people still drink water that is contaminated by human waste. And then there's climate. We depend too much on oil and gas. We use it up too quickly. This warms the planet, as you know, and a hot planet burns to ash plant and animal life on the land and in the seas. We are destroying 25 million acres of forest every year, mercifully every year. Between climate change and deforestation, we are losing life at an alarming rate. We are extinguishing species. Many who were here long before humans called Earth home. When you count civil wars and internal conflicts, there are more active conflicts today in the world than at any time since World War II. 82 million people around the world fled their homes last year, not knowing where they would go. About half were children, and these children are denied medical care, they're denied schooling, and they are often separated from their parents and subject to child labor. Democracy is retreating across the world. The U.S. saw its peaceful transition of power disrupted for the first time on January 6, 2020. The U.S. has been now labeled a backsliding democracy. India, with the world's largest population, has been downgraded from free to partly free. Authoritarian governments from China to Russia to many other smaller countries are actively repressing democratic uprisings. So here we are, in this place all together. These are some of our shared sorrows. We each carry within us the individual sorrows of our lives and the shared sorrows that we live together. And so, let's just take a moment and just reflect for a moment on the sorrows that are here in your life, from the small to the very large, from the suffering of your child for whom you forgot to pack a lunch, as I did today with mine, to the sufferings of the world. All right. what I want to talk about now is this. I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you the story of how did we get here? How did we arrive in this place where we live in a culture that creates so much more suffering than the suffering that is already innate in our being human? And this is a story, this is not a make-believe story. This is a story that anthropologists and archaeologists have been telling us for some time now. That we as a species, we as humans, we lived there was a point in time where we lived in a world of great humanity, a world of great hospitality. People lived in communities, villages, tribes, small cities, and they were all interconnected, one to the other. And people could travel freely from one place to the other, and wherever they went, they were welcome there. And so in this time, in this place, there was great cultural exploration. This was a time and a place where cultures, I'm going to keep playing this music, I like it. This was a time and a place in our culture, in our history, when, let's just say, I wanted to be king for the day, or I just wanted to be king of the community. I would go to the community members and I would say, make me king today. And they would come and they would give me some sort of ceremony and I would be king of the village. And there was really no risk in my being king. Because if I began to rule in a way that was somehow inconsistent with their natural relational nature, they could simply get up and go to a different town. They'd be welcome there. Or rather than all get up and go to a different town, they could just essentially ignore what I was saying and keep living their lives. In this situation where people were welcomed everywhere, the only rulers were pretend rulers because they held no power over their people because their people weren't locked in place to be controlled. Now, during this time of great hospitality and great cultural exploration, something happened. Something happened in one community that changed all of our collective fates going forward in time. In one community, a ruler arrived, and we're just going to make her a female. A female ruler arrived, and for whatever reason, she fell in love with this idea of being queen, and she wanted to make sure that no matter what, she did not relinquish her queenness. And so she came up within herself with a particular way in which she would hold on to power. And what she decided she would do was she would tell the people in her village, she would tell them, we are us. Everyone outside these city walls, these village walls, they are them. She began to highlight the superficial differences between the people that lived in the village and the people that lived outside of it. And she began to diminish the shared humanness of all people. And she began to convince the people within her community that the them that lived outside the village walls were very dangerous. And the us that lived within the city walls, we were the only ones that we could be safe with. And so this time of great hospitality, when there was a collective sense of us, that we all belonged to each other, we were all welcomed wherever we went, began to break apart. And now what happened was real trouble for this queen ruler as she locked the people into her village, because they began to become scared to leave. They became locked in place. They became convinced that the them outside the city walls, that those of them, that they were dangerous. So as people became locked in place, this ruler could begin to impose ways of living on them that were incongruent with who they really were, with their natural relational self. Once they were locked in place, they were trapped by whatever that queen said. And it's at this exact moment in history that we start to see class systems in place. We start to see archaeological evidence of a royal class, a commoner class, and then slaves whose lives were taken from them. Now, the queen doesn't stop at just locking her people in place and controlling them in a way that creates more power for her. To hold on to that power, she has to continue to augment the narrative. And she then says, you see those them outside the city walls? You see those them outside the city walls? They are very, very dangerous. And we must now form a standing army. And we must go out there and we must either convert them into us or we must eliminate them. And this is how we start to have the colonialization, where we start to form armies to force people to become us. We start to have mass genocide, where we kill entire populations because they refuse to become us. This is what leads to the colonialization in our more recent history of the Africas, of the South and North Americas, the decimation of the American Indian and other indigenous populations worldwide. This all comes from this separation from us into them. Now, what is fascinatingly tragic is, where has this taken us today? Well, it's taken us today, all of us, into the marketplace. I use the word marketplace to talk about the consumer culture. It's taken us all into this consumer culture, this place where, this is what's really powerful, this place where the notion of us has shrank so much that us is me and them is everybody else. Because what does the marketplace teach us? It teaches us that the only way to be safe is if I am collecting my own pile of wealth to protect myself. And your job is to collect your own pile of wealth to protect yourself. And so we each then live with the isolation of being separate from each other as we try to make our own way in the world. We each live with the exhaustion that comes from having to work so hard to make enough that we can finally feel safe with our own pile of money. And what has been lost? We've traded in the security that comes from being with each other. We've traded in the mutuality of caring for each other and knowing we are safe because we are with each other. We have traded that in for the security that comes from building our own pile of wealth. And in doing that, we have gone from a culture of togetherness into a culture of such separateness that each one of us is asked to exist all on our own. And from that place, when we are separated from each other, then all these collective sufferings of the planet and of humanity all become possible. I want to tell you now what happens to each of us as individuals when we are subject to the to this culture. I believe that you and I, that each of us were born expecting a village. We were born expecting to be born into this time of great hospitality. We are born as relational beings, and our expectation as relational beings is that we will be welcomed by everyone wherever we go. And we will welcome people into our hearts as well. We were born this way. We know we have all the scientific evidence that says that we are born for each other. We are born to welcome each other and to be welcomed by each other. But what happens when someone, let's just say I, am born into this culture? So let's just take me as a child, little Carl. I'm born for a relationship. But I'm in a family where both my parents go to work. They both have to work because they both need to generate an income, and it takes both their incomes as school teachers for there to be enough money for us to feel safe, for them to feel safe. And so every day they go to work, but even when they come home with briefcases filled with papers to grade. And when little Carl needs them and reaches out for them in relationship, they are busy grading their papers. And then they also have to take care of the housework. There's dishes to wash, laundry to clean, meals to cook. And all this takes them away from time with little Carl. And then when they're not doing that, they need some relief, some way to escape. They turn on the TV. They hide behind a wall of newspaper as they catch up on the daily news. And they disappear behind screens and papers as they escape to get relief from the exhaustion they feel. Again, leaving little Carl all by himself. And even when they are not busy escaping or working or taking care of household things, even then they are anxious. They're worried about having enough, not having enough. What's happening with their work? Are they safe on the job? And so even at those times, they have been taken away from little Carl. And so what happens to little Carl is he reaches out into a relationship again and again, but finds that his parents aren't there enough. Well, he starts to internalize these messages. He creates what Eric Berne called the parent ego state. He internalizes all these messages and starts to believe what his parents are implicitly telling him, that you can't really count on a relationship to be there for you, that you must learn to survive on your own. And he develops an entire system of coping mechanisms to soothe himself because the relationships weren't there to tend to him. And all those soothing mechanisms, all those coping styles, Eric Berne called the child ego state. And so Carl fragments from just being his natural relational self into forming a part of him that says you must learn to survive on your own, and a part of him that works to contain all the felt experiences he now can't share with the world. And now Carl believes he must survive on his own, and he goes out and builds a life based on surviving on his own that propagates the consumer culture. And so the marketplace creates the isolation and exhaustion that the child feels. And the child then goes out and creates the marketplace. In other words, the separation of the culture becomes a fragmentation in the person, which then goes back out in the world and continues to create separation. And we are caught in this loop of separation. There is a tremendous grief that each of us carry within ourselves for what we know we lost early on in our lives. The parts of ourselves that we had to tuck away, the parts of ourselves that were natural to us, but outside the radius of comfort of our family of origin. There are all these ways in which we have learned a life script, a story about how we must live in order to be safe. And this takes place in a culture that tells the stories about how life must be. Because our culture says value the consuming and producing parts of yourself, devalue the relational self, because your safety will come by producing more and creating more wealth, not from being in relationship with each other. Completely incongruent with who we were born to be. No wonder we have so much to grieve together. As I share all this, my hope is that you are able to pause for a moment and think about what was lost for you early in your childhood. Where did you have to tuck yourself away? What did you learn about the world, about your parents, about men, about girls, about women, about boys? What was taught to you that you took in and has become a part of a story that isn't yours, but has been pushed inside of you by the outside world? And what have you lost along the way? All right, I'm just going to flip this page so I can get to the next page. Yes. Now all this stands in such tremendous contrast to indigenous cultures. In these indigenous cultures, in these collective cultures, in these cultures that I think were a part of our time of great hospitality. In these cultures, security did not come from building your own pile of wealth. Security came from the tribe, from the village, from the community. We all worked at a time when we as humans lived in these tribes. We all worked collectively. We all worked together. Work was shared. And so because of that, we only needed to work 15 hours a week to make enough for us to truly have everything we needed to live well. That left us abundant time to really be with each other, to welcome our children. It gave us abundant time to sing, to play, to laugh, to dance, to find ways to connect to transcendental forces, to feel alive with each other and alive with the greater world and alive with the heavens. This is what we have lost. This is what we are all grieving, is this place of belonging that was once ours as humans. It is not here right now in the way that we all need it to be. And so I want to talk about the way back. But interestingly, I want to talk about grief as that doorway back. Grief is a profoundly powerful experience. Grief has the power to take us to our knees, and we will talk more about that. Grief also has the power to break us out of our life scripts, out of the stories we were told to believe about ourselves. And beyond that, grief comes with the power to break us out of a marketplace culture and bring us back to a collective culture where we find safety in each other again. This is how powerful grief is. But first, grief comes knocking, and we must answer the door. We have been taught in this culture of ours to try to deny the undeniable, to try to escape the inescapable. There is no escaping grief. It is real, and it is here. So, and yet the culture says things like, when we're young, our culture says to us, boys don't cry. It says to us, don't cry over spilled milk. It says, stop your crying or I'll really give you something to cry about. Those were messages we heard when we were young. And as we got older, the words changed, but thematically it stayed the same. As we got older, what we began to hear instead were things like, good men are tough men. When the tough get going, the going get tough. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We were told that we needed to, again, not allow grief to interrupt our lives. Why were we told this? I believe that we were told this as if it were a virtue, that toughness is a virtue, that our ability to repress our grief is somehow a virtue. But I actually believe this is a form of cultural manipulation. I believe at some level, a marketplace culture knows that if we began to grieve openly, that we would find ourselves so quickly connected to each other that it would be impossible to want to live separately. And we would find ourselves pulled toward each other with such a compelling force that the culture, the marketplace culture itself, would be at risk. Because how absurd is it to think that we are here to create our own pile of wealth when there are people in front of us grieving? In that moment, what matters most is our desire to be with them and bring our compassion to them, which would connect us and pull us out of this culture. I think the culture knows how dangerous grief is to its survival, and I think that is why we are actively taught not to grieve. Look at what bereavement cards say. You've just lost your husband, your parent, your child. You've just lost something very precious. And the card says, may your memories of your loved ones bring you comfort. Or it says, may the people who still surround you bring you comfort in this difficult time. It's way too early for comfort. This is not about comfort now. Because when grief comes, grief calls us to a time in the ashes. Grief pulls us into a time that is outside of time. We are pulled into a world that exists beneath our world. We're pulled into a deeper world where the regular daily chores of life seem suddenly meaningless. We're pulled into an underworld where we are asked to spend time in the ashes, because ashes are all that remains when something that we profoundly love has been lost, burnt away. And there is no way around this time. Right? In the language of psychology, what happens when grief comes is grief pulls us out of our life script. The stories we've told ourselves about what our life was supposed to look like and who we were supposed to be. Early in our lives, we develop a life script, a story we tell ourselves about this is me, this is my life. Script gives us identity. Right? We say, I am a parent, I am a spouse, I am a teacher, I am an engineer, I am a doctor. We identify ourselves with these things and we imagine this is us. It creates a sort of predictability, a sort of consistency, stability that we come to rely on in our lives. But when grief comes, grief is wild. Grief will not be tamed by our life script. Grief pulls us out of our life script. And so no wonder we feel lost. Grief pulls us out from this shore of life script where we felt safe and pulls us out into the sea. And we get caught in this riptide of grief that pulls us away from these shores that were familiar and known and felt like home. And where are we going? Where will grief take us? We don't know. We don't know. But we have really no choice but to allow grief to take us this way. Because here it is. Grief is like this big wind that blows off the roof of your house. And all of a sudden, you see this huge sky up above you. It's like this big wind. It's like you've been leaning on these posts that refuse to bend. And you've been leaning on these posts as if you need these posts to stand up. And the wind comes and the posts don't bend. And so they break away. And suddenly you're standing without what you have always leaned on for your whole life. Having to figure out, how do I stand without this? So grief, when it comes, takes everything away, even our sense of who we are. But if we allow it to, it can take us to a deeper sense of ourselves. Not right away, but in time. I want to read a little bit from an article in the New York Times written by a woman who had lost her daughter, her 14-year-old daughter, just a few months earlier. Because I think, and I'm just going to share excerpts from it, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, because I think it speaks so eloquently to how grief takes us away from the world that we knew and the world that was important and precious to us. I have struggled since writing the eulogy for my 14-year-old. I have struggled to use the past tense. How can I apply the past tense to someone still so fully alive, so fully present? I am asked daily by friends and colleagues about how I am feeling. I try to explain that I am terrifically, terribly, surrealistically sad, but I am not always unhappy. Sometimes I find my daughter in her cell phone, which is alive with her photos and videos and the beginnings of the story she wrote. I miss her phone when I am away from it. I crave it. I share it with myself in tiny doses. But the stories in my daughter's phone are finite, and I have all her photos I will ever have. I can only look backwards. The pain that my remaining daughter feels, the pain that my remaining daughter Hannah feels over losing her sister is concrete and complex. In the early days, her hurt was so raw that we could just barely keep a hold of her. Hannah worried that she was so angry with God that God would be angry with her. We explained to her that we come from a tradition of questioning and confronting even God. We reassured her we are all angry. In a heartbreaking time since my daughter left us, we have struggled to understand how it's possible such a big life is no longer here. I have taken some comfort in knowing the night before she died that her final words were to tell her sister she loved her. I have taken some comfort in knowing how we all whispered to her again and again and again that we loved her, even in those last moments, even as I felt her leaving me. I lay with her for hours after she was gone, knowing I would never have the chance again, until my husband had to gently tell me it was time to let the men from the funeral home in. Shockingly, I still wake each morning. In the first moments of each day, a part of me still wonders if somehow reality will change, or if this new grief sickness is here to stay. To honor my daughter's physical presence was only ours for 14 years. but her joy and her pain will be ours forever, even if we live another 50 without her. This is what grief calls us into. This time in the ashes, this time pulled out to sea, this world, this underworld beneath our world. I want to read one more piece, which speaks a little bit to where does this go when we allow grief to run its course, which can be years and years. Where does it take us in the end? I believe it takes us to a wisdom. I believe it takes us to a wisdom that we can only find in the darkness. And here's what spiritual teacher Ram Dass wrote in responding to a letter he received from parents who had lost their daughter. I cannot soothe your pain with any words, nor should I. It must burn its purifying way to completion. Now is the time to let your grief find expression. No false strength. Our rational minds can never understand what has happened, but our hearts, if we keep them open to God, will find their own intuitive way. For something in you dies when you bear the unbearable. But as you pass through that dark night of the soul, you begin to see as God sees, and to love as God loves. But we will need each other if we are going to get there. There is something very important for us all to do with our grief, and that is bring it to each other, share it with one another. Find those people in this world who understand that feelings are to be shared and that feelings connect us. Because that is what feelings are for. Why are we sad? We are sad so we can share it with someone and receive their compassion. Why are we scared? We are scared so that someone can come to us and hold us and tell us it's okay. Why are we angry? We're angry so that people will hear us and take us seriously and respond to what we're telling them. And why are we anxious? We're anxious because we need the reassurance of those around us. Feelings connect us to each other, and nothing connects us to each other. Nothing more than grief. There is nothing more vulnerable, nothing more tender, nothing more raw than a person grieving. This is profoundly connecting. For when I find myself in the presence of someone with the courage to openly grieve with me, many things happen. The first of which, I am pulled outside of my control. I am pulled into a place of great compassion for them. And at the one hand, I feel with them, but I also create a container into which their grief can pour, and I can carry it with them, so they don't have to carry it all alone. But grief shared does two more things simultaneously that are profoundly important. When you share your grief with me, it touches my own grief as well. I, as the recipient of your grief, I have things I have not fully grieved. I'm sure I have things I have not grieved at all. Your grief pulls these up into the foreground of my awareness so that I can begin to grieve these. Because these losses, these sorrows, they are like rocks inside of me. Rocks that interrupt the flow of my being. And as they come up, they can be moved through me as well. So when you grieve, you call up my grief. So I too can grieve. And in my grief, I too can become free. And when you grieve with me, you and I exist in a space outside of our culture. In the moment you are grieving and I am here with you, we are doing something very different than what our culture tells us to do, which is to get busy consuming and producing and building our own piles of wealth. How absurd. When you grieve and I am here, we are in a far more profound place. We have recreated a culture of us. I am with you, and you are with me, and we are here with our hearts open. And this is where we belong with each other. In that moment in time, we have superseded the marketplace culture and returned to an indigenous culture of connection. We have broken free from our culture of separation and broken into a culture that was there before and that is still there waiting for us, the culture of connection. And so it is so important that we grieve together, that we find these ways to come together and share our grief with one another, that we are no longer alone in all the griefs that we have. And so let us do today an activity together that is about helping you experience your grief with me right now. I would like to invite us into a shared visualization. Again, if you can, close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. As I find now what I want to share with you. Here it is. For the next few minutes, there is nothing for you to do. For the next few minutes, there is nowhere for you to go. For the next few minutes, there is nothing for you to accomplish. And for the next few minutes, there is no one you need to be. This is a time simply to be with yourself and with me. As you breathe in, imagine yourself sitting in a room, meditating. Let this image come to you however it comes. Let the image fully emerge. See yourself in a chair or in a cushion, simply noticing your breath. As you settle into the image, imagine hearing someone open the door to the room you're meditating in. Invite them in. Let them walk in. Let them come and sit right in front of you. And now imagine this is you sitting right in front of you. Somehow, in this moment, your entire life story is known to you. You can see in this moment all the ways you have suffered, all the ways you have been betrayed, all the ways others have betrayed you. You know all the moments, you remember all the moments of despair and loneliness. You know all the places of shame and neglect, of loss and of death. And you say to yourself, I know suffering. In this moment, sensing the sorrows in your heart, simply radiate loving kindness to the you sitting in front of you. Distracting thoughts might arise, but just come back to your heart and extend your compassion to this person, to this you. When you feel ready, offer these blessings. May you encounter life simply free. May you encounter life just as it is, just as it unfolds in front of you. And now let this image of you fade away and allow all the people in your world to come into the room with you. Your spouse, your child, your parent, your friends, they too know suffering. Share your compassion with them. Offer them your loving kindness for a few minutes. And now bless them and let them be on their way. And now imagine yourself sharing this planet with all beings everywhere, all of whom know this suffering. Open your heart to them. Feel your compassion for all of them. And share your blessings with them, whatever they may be. And then come back now here. Thank you. Thank you for taking this time with me. Thank you for joining me on this journey as we talk about grief and culture and connection together. Okay, that is all. I'm grateful for the gift of your time. I'm grateful for the gift of you. I wish you well. Goodbye for now.